Hello everybody, I'm Clouderman and welcome to this rendezvous and docking tutorial for Kerbal Space Program 1. So if you have ever played Kerbal Space Program 1, you've undoubtedly tried to dock two craft together, and it isn't always the easiest of manoeuvres, so the plan for this video is to show you two different ways to approach and dock with a space station essentially. So the first way I'm going to show you is what I call a direct approach, where we basically get ourselves on a trajectory to impact the craft and just have them come together naturally. The second one is what I call a staggered approach, and the staggered approach is used for approaching docking ports that aren't in line with your craft. Anyway, you can already see that I have three craft in space around Kerbin. The target is the SWM-94 communications satellite, and now all three of these are ever so slightly modified versions of the stock KSp craft that you can get. So this is a stock craft. We also have the Sally Hut 2, I've called it. The actual stock one is the Sally Hut 1, but of course I've done a couple of modifications on it, and the other one is basically just the top pod for the Kerbal X. So this is the SWM-94 communications satellite, and this is going to be our target. Now this thing doesn't actually have any RCS control, so that is one of the reasons why I am making it the target, and also it already has several docking ports available on it. This docking port isn't actually on the stock version. This is one of the modifications I made, as well as the lighting as well, but yeah, otherwise this is a completely stock vehicle. So what we'll do is we will go to our map, and then we are going to select the Sally Hut 2, and we're going to set that as the target. So we will now switch to the Sally Hut. So what I want to do is get this into a rendezvous with the satellites. So we're going to go to the map, and we are going to find the satellite, and we're going to click on that and set it as the target. Now one thing we can do is we can use Kerbal Engineer, and I'm only going to use Kerbal Engineer in this rendezvous maneuver, and then the only other thing I'm going to use is the nav ball, just to show you that you don't really need mods to do a rendezvous and docking maneuver easily. All you really want is the Kerbal Engineer, and I'm pretty sure everybody has that. And now I'm going to activate the rendezvous flight HUD. Now with regards to Flight Engineer, if you're not familiar with it, what you can do is you can go in and you can edit all of the parameters in each of the various different categories. And what I've done is, on the default rendezvous, there's a lot of information that's not really necessary, so I've basically just set it up to have these modules in it. So if you'd like to set this up to be the same way, then just take a screenshot of this. But basically what we want to know is the target that we are going for, the distance, our relative velocity, our relative inclination, the time till we approach the target, and then the more approach information. But we'll get more into that later on. It just makes things a lot easier having it like this. Another good thing about this particular feature is that we do actually have the option to look at the target. So, when we are wanting to find where it is, we don't have to look around all the time. We can literally just click on that and we'll look straight towards where the target is. We can also switch to the target, which means we don't have to go back and forth through the map. And then we can also focus on the target in the map if we want to. So the first thing we want to do is get our inclination down to 0 degrees relative inclination. So our target ship is the one on top, the yellow one. Our orbit is the one underneath, the blue one. So we need to match our inclination with that of the target ship. And this is possibly the most important thing you can do in any rendezvous and docking maneuver, because if you do not get this right, then you will not be able to get a close encounter. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the next node on our orbit, which is the ascending node. The descending node is over there, and you can see we've got a 1.9 degree difference in our inclination. So what we need to do is we need to create a maneuver on our ascending node, and I do have the improved maneuver node mod, so we can literally just set our maneuver to the ascending node. And then all we need to do is, because we are approaching the ascending node, we need to do an anti-normal burn, and that's how I always remember which one we want to do. So anti-normal is the one on the bottom, normal is the one on the top. So we need to pull down on anti-normal. And like I say, I always imagine that AN equals anti-normal. Anyways, so what we can do now is we can scroll down on the normal arrow until we get a 0 degrees relative inclination, and you can see down here, if we also go into the bottom left of the screen, we can also click on the advanced orbital info, and that will give us our inclination as well. So now we can see that we are down at 0 degrees projected. We will point our craft at the maneuver, and once it's there we will warp and perform the burn. And now if we get rid of the maneuver node, we can see that our relative inclination, or our inclination even, is 0 degrees. So if we bring up our rendezvous dots again, you can see that our actual inclination is 0.010 degrees. So yeah, we are pretty much bang on 0 degrees inclination. So the next thing we need to do is actually perform our rendezvous maneuver. So the reason that I have placed these two ships in two different height orbits is because I wanted to show you that you basically need to do two different things when it comes to actually reaching aircraft. So in this case we are in a lower orbit, meaning that we need to extend our apoapsis in order to reach the target ship's orbits. Now if we were to just do it where we are now, we will end up with a separation of 201 kilometers apart, and the problem here is that we are actually ahead of the target ship. So if we move the maneuver node around, you can see that it's actually increasing our distance. What we are going to have to do is we're going to have to do several orbits in order to get into position, because due to the fact that we are in a lower orbit, we need to actually be behind the ship, whereas where the higher orbit is basically the other way around. But we'll get into that when we do our staggered approach. So anyway, yeah, let's get into position. So you can see now that we are close enough together that we should be able to actually get our intercept now. So we'll place a maneuver ahead of us on the orbit, and then all we're going to do is we are going to extend our apoapsis until we get our intersect markers. And usually what I like to do is I like to just keep going a little bit until we get our second intersect markers, because then that means that we are definitely passing through the target ship's orbit, whereas if it is only the two orange ones, then there is a chance that we aren't actually reaching their orbit line. So anyway, let's have a look at the distance to intersect. So it is a distance of 138 kilometers. So now all we need to do is just move our maneuver node around the orbit until the number reaches as close, well, I prefer to get below a kilometer. So you can see now we are down to a kilometre. We'll go down to half a kilometre, and our actual burn probably won't be that accurate, but that means that as long as we are under a kilometre, the actual rendezvous will be much easier. So anyway, we will now point ourselves at the manoeuvre and perform this burn. So now if we look at the Kerbal Engineer readout on the bottom of the screen, you can see that our relative speed at approach, which is when we will be closest together, will be 16 meters per second, which is pretty good. Our separation at approach will be around about 250 meters. Our time till approach is 14 minutes. So anyway, let's warp forwards, and I'm going to keep my eye on the time till approach, and once we get to about a minute away, we'll quit the warp. Okay, so our distance at present is coming up on 500 meters. So if we have a look around, we can actually see it is right there. Now, one thing you can do if you can't find the actual satellite or your target ship, with this feature, you can actually just set look at target, and it will automatically focus the camera on the target, and then you just need to look around to actually see where it is. So what we need to do now is we actually need to slow down, because our relative velocity in relation to the target at present is 15 meters per second. So what we want to do is we want to turn retrograde, and when we do this, we need to make sure that the top of the nav ball is set to target and not orbit or surface. It must be set to target for this. And now what we can do is we can increase our throttle and reduce our relative velocity. Now, I did go a little bit far there, but that's no problem. All we need to do once again is point back retrograde. I mean, we could do this bit with RCS, but I'm going to use the engine for this and just get ourselves properly slowed down. Okay, and there we are at 0 meters per second, so we are flying in perfect formation with the target ship. So we can either use the square bracket keys on our keyboard, or we could use the switch to target button on the Kerbal Engineer readout. So what we're going to do is we're going to dock to this port. So the first thing we want to do is right click on it, hit control from here, and then we need to make sure that we are actually set to the correct target, and I believe we still are. So all we need to do now is point at the target. And now ideally this craft will remain pointed directly at the target ship. So we'll switch back to our main craft, and now once again we are going to point at the target. We are going to change the camera orientation by going to locked, and this just means that we can line up these ships perfectly. So we'll do a bit of rotation and get ourselves lined up. Now what we want to do is we want to have a look at the nav ball, and you can see at the minute we are moving away from the target at a slight angle. So we'll activate our RCS, we'll use H to move forwards and get ourselves actually travelling towards the ship, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to boost up to about 1 meter per second. Now the further away you are, the higher you can go, but I wouldn't recommend going any faster really than 2.5 meters per second. The reason being is the faster you are going, the less effective your translation controls become when you are trying to do RCS adjustments, and of course the further away you are, the more drift you get as well. So the closer you can get to your target on your actual rendezvous maneuver, the better. But anyway, let's actually get ourselves docked in. So we are currently moving towards it at just under 1 meter per second, so I'm actually going to go up to 1.5. Now you can press delete to actually change your controls, your WAS and D keys, and your shift and control keys to do the translation, but I prefer not to do that because it can get very confusing. And yeah, it looks to me like all we're going to have to do is dock. Now we will do our final adjustments, looking at the nav ball to make sure we are heading straight towards the target, and we are docked. And it is as simple as that. So that was the direct approach that I call it, because we go direct into the front or the back of the ship, whereas in the next one we're actually going to be going into a side docking port. And now a space station wouldn't be a space station without a crew. So if we go back onto the map, like I said, I do have a second craft in space, and this is actually the Kerbal X2 with 3 Kerbals on board. So the first thing we need to do with the Kerbal X then is we need to actually select the target ship. Now we could go into the map and just select it that way, or we could go down to our Kerbal Engineer readout and we will find stations and we will select Sally Hut as the target. And now if we go onto the map now, you can see we are at a considerably higher orbit than the target ship, and we just happen to be in the correct spot, because when you are approaching from a higher orbit you need to be ahead of the target ship, and you also need to be further away from the target ship the further apart your orbits are. So all we need to do is have a look at our inclination to start off with, and you can see that our inclination is out at 1.3 degrees, which could cause a bit of an issue. So yeah, what we're going to have to do then is we're going to have to create a maneuver on our descending node to start off with. We will pull out on normal because remember, AN equals anti-normal, DN equals normal, and then yeah, we just need to wait until our ascending node is at 0 degrees, and once again we can always have a look down here just to make sure. Anyways, what we need to do now then is we need to point at the maneuver and get this one out of the way. Okay, so you can see if we delete the maneuver node that our inclination is now at 0 degrees, which is perfect. And now if we go back onto the map, we'll create our maneuver ahead of us. Because it is in a lower orbit, we need to do a retrograde burn to lower our periapsis, and you can see we have our first point of intersect markers, and we'll go until we get our second point of intersect markers. So what I'm going to do is I am going to move the maneuver node until it is right behind our ship, and then down here on the bottom left, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we select the graphical maneuver editor and then hit the plus button, and that will increase the number of orbits until we actually perform the maneuver. So you can see now the markers are actually getting close together, so we'll add another orbit. And now what we can do is we can move the maneuver node back until we get an intersect between the two markers. But anyway, that is our maneuver set, so all we need to do now is point at the maneuver once more, warp to the maneuver, and then we will be ready to do our intercept. Okay, so we have a look at the map. You can see that our actual current intercept distance is 0.2 kilometers, and you can see down here it says that our separation at approach would be around about 200 meters, which is pretty good. So this time I think I'm actually going to warp to the intersect point or shot just before. So what we're going to do then, while we are about 17 kilometers away still, we're going to make sure that we are set to target on the top of our nav ball. We are then going to point ourselves retrograde. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to use the time down here to get us down to about a minute away from the target. Okay, so we're going to use our throttle now to start reducing our relative speed. The target is, oh, there it is. But actually, oh, this is getting a bit close. Well, I've been holding at around about 300 meters distance from the target until we got into the sunlight, basically, because I didn't want to do this docking in the dark. So here we are, ready to do our docking, but of course we are pointed almost directly at the front of the ship. So in this docking attempt we are going to be using two different mods. The first one is going to be the docking port alignment mod, which can come very in handy, although at the moment we haven't got a port targeted and it won't allow us to target a port. And the other one is the docking port camera mod, which if you right click on any docking port you can activate the camera, and that'll bring up a little window here as well. And with this one, the important information is on the right up here. We've got our distance, our velocity, our X, Y and Z or Z axes for the distances and for the distance and the velocities, and of course our relative yaw and pitch as well. Now I generally don't use those numbers too much because obviously we haven't got the docking port targeted yet, and it's probably targeting the centre of the ship. But what I like to do is I like to use a mix of all of these to kind of get where we want to be when doing this docking attempt, because of course we aren't wanting to point the docking port straight at us. This is why this is called the staggered approach or the indirect approach. So what we're going to do first is we are actually going to approach the target. So we don't want to approach the target directly in front of it, we want to approach a little bit below. So I'm going to start off by pointing our ship below the target ship, and then we are just going to boost forwards until we reach around about 1.5 meters per second so that we can drift underneath the target ship. You also get some pretty sweet views from the docking port camera while it's up. We are starting to come underneath the ship, and I think what I want to do is I want to dock on one of the underside docking ports. But before we select our target docking port, I think we're going to actually stop our movement. So we'll slow ourselves down in relation to the target. So you can see now our relative velocity is at 0. It says down here our relative velocity is 44 millimeters per second and rising. You also get your velocity up here, which of course is 0.04. And once we actually select our docking port, there we are, set as target, you can now see we have the information on the docking port alignment indicator as well. So what we'll do then is we'll get ourselves into the correct orientation for the actual docking port before we start moving any further. So we're going to pitch ourselves up so that our rocket is pointed in the same orientation, and you'll notice now that as we start to get close to pointed in the correct orientation for the docking port, we get this little marker on the docking port alignment mod. You can also see the satellite in the docking camera, which is pretty sweet. Anyway, what we want to do is we want to get this orange marker in the middle of the crosshair on the docking port alignment mod, so we'll make sure that is lined up. I'm going to actually roll the craft because it's not quite, well, we're in the wrong orientation, so you know, up is down and down is up. So we'll get ourselves aligned on the nav ball first of all. We'll just make sure that the orange marker in the docking port alignment mod is actually in position or in the centre of the crosshair. And now that means that we are pointed in the right orientation to actually dock with the target docking port. Now, it looks to me like we need to, first of all, translate to the left. So we'll use our RCS to translate to the left by using J. And now you can see, as we drift to the left, these green lines are going to start drifting into the centre. We can also get information about our distance from the D axis up here, I believe it is. That seems to be the one that's going down. So once that hits 0, we want to be stopped. We do appear to have some upwards translation as well, so we're going to try and burn down ever so slightly. And once again, using these values, the V values, they will actually help us because those are our velocity values. So what we can do is we can see that by using K, we're actually changing our X value. So we'll get that down to 0, so we're not drifting. We'll then line up with our Y axis by using the L and J keys and get that down to 0 or as close to as possible. And then for the Z axis, it's the H and N keys. So now we are almost perfectly flying in formation with the target ship. So the next thing we want to do then is we have obviously drifted too far to the left, so we want to bring ourselves back over and try and get ourselves aligned. While we're here, we might as well start translating down a bit as well. And now a good way to get an idea of your direction of travel is by using the retrograde or prograde marker on the docking port alignment indicator. Okay, you can see both green lines have just lined up, so we'll make sure we are locked in. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to quickly switch over to this craft, find out the docking port we are docking to, which I believe is this one. I'm going to activate the docking camera on this one, and I like doing this just as a kind of bit of fun. It's also a good reference because you can get an idea of where your ship is in relation to that docking port, and you can also see your thrusters burning. So that is another good way to get an idea of your alignment. Now what we'll do is we'll make sure the retrograde marker on here is pointed dead centre, and now you can see everything is pretty much lined up. Anyways, yeah, let's start our actual approach. So now we need to use H to burn forwards, and we'll go towards the target at around about 1 meter per second. Everything looks lined up, all the arrows are pointed in the right direction, everything's lined up here. We could probably roll a little bit, there we go, because we can now bring that T marker to the centre, and that means we are now perfectly aligned. However, we have drifted slightly, so let's adjust our translation and bring ourselves down. Let's go a little bit closer. Now, yeah, this camera, which is the camera on the Kerbal X, I actually mounted it wrong, which is why it's that way. So once again, I'm using this camera to actually establish where we are in relation, and we're going to use the light and make sure that that light is perfectly centered in the middle of the crosshair. Now the crosshair seems off here, which is a bit unusual. That means that we are slightly at an angle, but we are moving in smoothly. I'll tell you what, we'll focus on the docking port. Set the camera here so we've got a good view of both. Now we need to do a little bit more translation. I'm going to zoom out on both these cameras because it's getting quite close. I'm going to slow our approach with H, or should I say N, to about 0.5 meter per second. Slightly out, we're not quite perfectly aligned, but we're going to bounce slightly. There we go, and we are docked. And that's it, yeah, so that was an indirect approach is what I call it, and having all of those apps up at the same time to be able to kind of just have multiple reference points really does help when it comes to doing those kind of manoeuvres, because those kind of manoeuvres can be really, really difficult. Anyway, yeah, that's all there is for this video, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like me to do any guides on any other like techniques in this game, then give me a shout in the comments and let me know. Please check out my brand new series on YouTube as well for KSp Program 1, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.